The highest temples and tombs of old Nehekhara were to be found in the city of Khemri. It was the seat of Setra, king of kings once, and by his own account still. Atop his pyramids, he finally found the roar of his mortal days when he saw the Obsidian Legion clouding the western road. A fuzz of scouts probed the sands before the vanguard, sweeping up buried warriors for quick removal. Kazran's large gyrocopter circled above, flashing signal lights to observers below. To the rear, carriages of munitions and explosives chugged forward by the force of steaming engines. Oldor had come for a showdown. Setra summoned the might of his city, emptying mines and armories to provide even more skeletons for his host. Thousands came with him to the plain before the city walls. Oldor's legion formed up. Between shields, muskets, and black armor, there was hardly any dwarf to be seen in their line. Their static, quiet presence seemed to incense Setra beyond what reason his pickled spirit possessed. Even before his thralls were done assembling, he rode his chariot out to the battlefield alone. He approached the dwarves, appearing at first like an envoy. "No, that's him," Oldor concluded, closing his telescope. "He wishes to parley?" Story asked. "My terms are simple, and do not require his consent. Sharpshooters, when you're ready," Oldor ordered. A choir of 300 rifles toppled Setra's chariot and dismembered the King of Kings thoroughly. In such an unceremonious way he was defeated for a second time, although the effect now was less dramatic, for his army had among it countless nobles, princes, and even some lesser kings. They together could hold the animation of the host and ferry it into battle. There were foot soldiers aplenty, longbows, spears, and swords at the ready. There were Ushabti, the warrior idols, pushing to be at the front. There were Necropolis knights, the royal guards of the great city, wielding pikes from atop flared marble cobras. There was another Necro-Sphinx, the blade-armed beast that a shield wall could do little to halt. And further to this, a new construct, a War Sphinx, more animalistic than the Necro-Sphinx, and carrying a basket of priests and archers on its back. Oldor's formation thundered away as this great mix of foes drew close. The two sphinxes shrugged these blows off and bounded forwards. "Stone melters, let's go!" Oldor called. From the rear ranks came a band of 40 Dawi, dressed in metallic contraptions. There was a canister on their back, linked to a nozzle in their hands and a wind-up pump on their hips. They pulled goggles over their eyes and hopped over to stand right in the path of the sphinxes. "It works, lads, trust me," Kazran shouted to them. They began to pump handles on their devices, and as the sphinxes were almost upon them, the nozzles spewed a fizzing green liquid. You may recall Kazran working on such brews. He was trying to make a portable acid that would wither metal armors, but got much further along than that. His creation, the Stone Melter solution, was true to its name. When it splashed against the sphinxes, they recoiled. They did not feel pain, but the sudden disintegration of their forelegs was enough to worry about. The solution ate away at them, turning rock to a pooling sludge thudding down into the sand. And more green plumes came from the Stone Melter pumps. Before the tanks were emptied, the magical beasts had little physical form to work with. Kazran whooped, and the legionaries for once joined him. A Tomb King crawled from the mangled, upended basket beside the oozing mess, then was taken like a leaf in the wind when a hail of musket shots flashed from the shield line. By then the main body of the army was in range, and the shooting became continuous. The armies clashed, the Dawi brimming with fervour, and the skeletons drowning in deepening lethargy. The host wasn't halted, both due to the presence of invigorating priests and the nearby magical conduits throughout Khemri. Still, the engagement began poorly for the undead, and carried on that way until most were nestled back in the sand their King of Kings had summoned them from. The Dawi shot their way across that battlefield until the dark magic in the air was stilled. Every servant of the Tomb Kings was smashed and scattered, for 100 or so killed and wounded among the mortals. Not a negligible price for scarce dwarfs, however it did bring a great prize of war, Khemri. The gates were unlocked and unguarded. A chain of Dawi heaved them open with a joint push. The place was more than the pyramid complexes captured so far. It was a full city, complete with all facilities needed for life to carry on, upkept carefully by skeleton stewards. The Tomb Kings even had a few living humans to show off, although scant few. They seemed relieved to be free of their role as museum creatures. Even with the skeletons gone, the city was dangerous. Those dark winds of magic swirled, and even just an hour or two started to turn the Dawi's stomachs. The plague of undeath hung richly from the temples and black marble pillars. Of this latter construct there were many, perhaps representing the later stages of what Oldor and crew had interrupted at Koffer. The engineers began laying satchel charges around the bases of these beacons. Seeing this, Kazran went to appeal to Oldor. "For all we know, the spirits of those slain in the field there have retreated to these stones," Kazran argued. "If we take these, we can make something that follows the same principle as those motorized caravan wagons I gave you." "What of the winds?" Oldor asked. "The winds? Well, the winds are just a kind of energy too. If you make them into an engine, will we die in our sleep, engineer? That's what I'm asking, and I'll have the answer plain." Plain. Plainest is that I don't know." "Aye? Well, you needn't have come here to tell us that." "Remember, we're here precisely to put an end to all this," Story said. "This unholy city is the spring of our woes and the bane of Atalan. Our victory means nothing if we do not have these cursed stones parcelled up and sent to the four corners of the furthest wastes." "I can see you doing that, and doing it well, Thane," Kazran said patronizingly. "It's just what a good Dawi should do, and that's why it doesn't work. You think breaking the stones makes a difference? Sending them away certainly doesn't. These powers, the magic, undead, chaos energies curled up and ironed out over and over, it's not really anything like smithing or runes or machining. It's more like the ropes pulling behind the curtains. That's what I think. It has to hook onto something or do something all the time. Like me, you know? That's why me and the magical realm get along a bit. So the only choice we have is to use the powers of this place for our own ends, or pretend we've sealed them away and return home to see if a new god manifests from all that untapped rage of deathless souls streaming across the sky. Or, you know, something like that." "And even if we do that, you can't say if we'll come to regret it?" Oldor asked. "We've already stepped in it, my lord. What I hope is that it will turn out to be the least of our troubles. In a good way, I mean." "You almost had me for a moment," Story said with a shake of his head. Kazran was onto something when it came to the futility of banishing dark magic. It might have been the case that the best treatment for the curse of undeath was to wall the animated into a pen and let them live out their merry afterlives. Slaying them instead opened up many doors, between many realms. A compromise was reached after much debate. Kazran was allowed to take one intact pillar into a makeshift workshop to study, whatever physical process that entailed. The city itself stood, with its tombs and temples doubly sealed with fresh stones and mortar. After some late nights of paranoia, these stones were lined with blasting charges and wired up to be detonated at the slightest hint of trouble. Some fresh recruits from Atalan and some of the Legion's camp followers were left to oversee the city and prepare its defense against whatever the desert might offer. Who among them could possibly have been worrying more about that than what lay within and below the city itself? Still, to sit there and worry was useful training for the troubles to which the skeleton wars were merely a prelude. Kazran was left to make something of the captured materials, while the Legion's veterans conducted a march through the roads of northeastern Araby, homing in on small towns and strongholds still held by minor nobles of Nehekara. Some of these sites were destroyed outright, while others were turned into surface refuges for humans. Not the Arabians this time, but the foreseen influx of humans from other parts of the world. When Oldor and company returned to Khemri, Kazran was waiting for them with an air of pride. In fact, he was standing on some kind of altar just within the main gate, like he was about to make a speech. It was an iron tub with a weathered green bronze facade, into which was carved a stout, lordly face. A pointed crown formed crenellations around the platform above. From its mouth pointed a large bore cannon. What kind of address was such a podium meant to host? "And now, my big beauty, show them what you can do," Kazran declared from atop it. The whole thing suddenly began to shake, and steam rose from a funnel at the back. Sure enough, it trundled forwards under its own power, like a motorized carriage, only far too heavy to feature any known engine. So, he harnessed the power indeed. What manner of machine is this? Story said, not hiding his amazement. "I've seen such things among the Umgi," Oldor said. "A suit of armor with strength to wield cannon. Takes a lot of gizmos and fuel to make it move though, and the Umgi barely got to half this size." "Fully armored, plenty of space for powder and shot, plus the view from up here doesn't hurt," Kazran called down over the tank's rumbling. "Truly a mount fit for a lord of engineers, eh? And the necromancy pillars behind all this, is it?" "Ah, you guessed it. It's underneath. It's like giving the engines a 10-course breakfast. Wash it down with a little liquid coal, and it'll shift armor thick enough to crack the knuckles on a giant. And it's not exactly slow. See if any of you can keep up with me." At this, Kazran drove the tank down the main street. And indeed, while many Dawi ran their hardest to follow, the tank outpaced them, although this was over a smoothly paved avenue. Oldor and Story stood and watched the smoking beast trundle off towards the central palaces. "I think I owe the good grumbler an apology," Story said. "While I won't dare imagine there isn't some terrible curse associated with a machine of dark magic, I can't say I've ever seen anything like it. We might just be able to catch the Chaos Gods off guard. The fool's putting magic where his mouth is." "Aye, that engineer knows what he's doing all right," Oldor said plainly. "I won't say I'm not a little jealous, and I won't say I'm not a little put off by it all. Something tells me, Thane, that our master engineer is a vehicle of the gods. Kazran's at the centre of all our braids of fate, be they fair or foul. Everything that's happened so far is because of him." "I do think you have some part in your expedition as well, Lord." "My expedition to Lustria, you mean? Ah yes, I wonder what happened to that. Instead, we're here, and so is he. Funny how it worked out, don't you think?" "Oh, I don't suppose you want to elaborate on that." "Then keep not supposing it, and quietly too. Just carry on. Might be interesting to have a beast of metal on our side for once, eh?" After a short administrative stay in Khemri, the Legion went further east still. The deserts rolled their way out of the Arabian subcontinent and into the Old World proper. The sands carried on all the way to the tail of the World's End Mountains, where dwarves had ruled thousands of years ago. In the fertile shadows of that range were more Old Kingdom cities, and from there the Tomb Kings were harvesting more bones to remake their armies. Cetra, rebuilt from parts borrowed from lesser lords, fumed in lesser palaces, eager to have his revenge, but unable to fathom any method to achieve it. Cetra's captains took 3,000 skeletons to block the road and buy more time. They didn't reach their intended defensive lines before they ran into Oldor steaming the other way. A sudden battle broke out, in which those 3,000 skeletons approached the Dawi lines in disarray. 3,000 chances to practice shooting against a moving target. Oldor stood upon the tank, the land crawler as it was known, and gripped the points of the golden crown around it to brace against the firing of the cannon inside. The weapon was mounted carefully in a series of vices that permitted exacting corrections to aim, further aided by scopes in the facade's eyes. These first booming shots saw the priests and ritualists at the core of the undead split into many pieces. There was a black-blue sphinx carrying a Tomb King striding ahead of the army. For this, Oldor could try the new dark artillery powder, explosives powerful enough to launch 2 cannonballs at once, maybe more. The engine had to growl against the recoil when the weapon let out a flash as bright as the sun. The Sphinx's head was torn apart in a storm of stones, in turn sending the occupants of the basket on the back flying off. The body stumbled and fell, crashing over a company of oblivious skeletons. With no leaders left to command them otherwise, the warriors marched on at a steady pace into a growing hail of bullets. The Dawi's rifles thundered constantly, with those legionaries not firing able to help reload. They weren't needed in the shield wall, as these poor undead had no chance of getting close. The skeleton trump card was a band of horsemen who appeared from behind the dwarves, clattering in to assault the landcrawler. As Kazran had boasted, the armor was impervious to their swords, and the vehicle was too tall to climb atop. Crewmen on the roof shot down with blunderbusses, and the main gun tore chasms in the ground. By the time this was dealt with, and Oldor had turned back to the affairs in front, there was only the sight of 3,000 sets of motionless bones to behold. "Alright, carry on then," Oldor ordered. The legion gave a single cheer, reformed their column, and carried on their merry way. This, as you can imagine, was the twilight of the skeleton wars, and in turn, far, far away, on the rim of the untravelled chaos wastes, it was the dawn of fresh wars, the wars of prophecy. The rising of chaos was complete, and further to their many agents and cults across the world, they now assembled a huge pool of corrupted beings from behind their miasma. The armies of chaos, warriors, beasts, magicians, machines, all empowered by the sponsorship of callous gods. Their goal was nothing less than a transition of the state of reality, from the time of the mortal world to the new reality of chaos and material made whole. What that might look like in the end didn't bear thinking about. Word began to spread, carrying all anyone really needed to know. The end times had come.